From the moment you could understand words, the world started handing you explanations. This is what the universe is. This is who God is. This is who you are. Some of those explanations came wrapped in science, a hot, dense point, an explosion, billions of years of chance collisions slowly arranging themselves into stars, planets, and eventually you. Other explanations came wrapped in religion, an all-powerful God, a sacred book, a chosen people, rules, rituals, rewards, and punishments. Two very different stories, but they agree on one subtle message. The script has already been written for you. Your job is to accept it, not question it. And yet, somewhere in the middle of all that certainty, you might have felt it, that quiet tension under your ribs. The sense that neither story quite fits. That a universe made purely of accident feels strangely intentional. That a God who supposedly loves you but demands fear and shame doesn't quite add up. You play along because what choice do you have? The big questions are above your pay grade. You're told the mystery is either solved already or unreachable. But every so often, something cracks the surface. A dream that feels more real than waking life. A coincidence that is too precise to be dismissed. A moment of silence where you feel watched, not in a paranoid way, but in a way that feels noticed, as if something vast sees you and is waiting. Now imagine that into this already fragile balance, a book quietly appears. Not advertised, not shouted from pulpits, not pushed in universities. A thick, dense volume with no named author, no guru on a stage, no cult waiting to recruit you. A book that claims, without apologizing, to explain where the universe came from, how it is structured, who Jesus really was, what happens after you die, why the world is so broken, and what your soul is actually doing here. It sounds like the setup for a bad conspiracy theory or a clever work of fiction. Yet this book exists. It has a blue cover, thin paper, and a name that sounds almost alien. The Urantia Book. Urantia, it says, is what higher beings call our planet. Already the ground shifts beneath your feet a little. Our world, the center of our entire perception, is introduced as just one entry in a much larger catalog. From its opening pages, Urantia doesn't whisper, it calmly asserts. It tells you that what you've been given are fragments, half-stories, distorted myths, incomplete diagrams of a reality that is far more layered, more ordered, and more intimate than you've been told. It doesn't start with believe this or else. It starts with a challenge. What if the universe is not an accident, and God is not a distant monarch, but the organizing mind behind a living system? What if your soul is not a fragile ticket to heaven or hell, but a long-term project, an evolving being on a guided journey? What if the myths you grew up with were never meant to terrify you, but to point clumsily, symbolically, towards something much bigger that got lost along the way? For anyone drawn to mythology or esoteric thought, the idea of forbidden knowledge is not new. History is full of burned libraries, banned gospels, and voices silenced for saying the wrong thing about God or power. But most forbidden texts still have authors. Someone you can point to, praise, or blame. The Urantia Book does something stranger. It doesn't just claim to be inspired. It claims to be dictated. According to its story, humans didn't write it. Celestial beings did. They don't ask for worship. They don't demand a new church. They present themselves almost like administrators of a vast cosmic organization, stepping in at a specific moment in Earth's timeline to offer an update, a correction, a patch to a badly corrupted file. That alone is enough to trigger every alarm bell in a skeptical mind. And honestly, it should. Any book that claims to be a revelation deserves serious scrutiny. But here's where Urantia becomes hard to simply dismiss. It doesn't sound like typical channel material. There's no vague, floaty language. Instead, there are technical terms, hierarchical structures, detailed cosmology, psychological insight, and a narrative of Jesus' life that stretches over hundreds of pages, filling in years the Bible skips entirely. Whether you end up accepting any of it or not, you will almost certainly feel something as you move through its pages. The sensation of being spoken to as an adult, not as a child. It doesn't beg you to believe. It dares you to think. Before we dive into where this book supposedly came from, or what it says about angels, Lucifer, Jesus, or the architecture of the universe, it's worth pausing with one simple question. Why does a text like this feel threatening at all? Because if the official stories are complete, this book is irrelevant. But if something in you already suspects that the picture you were given is too small, then Urantia lands like a stone in still water. It doesn't offer comfort first. It offers perspective. It suggests that the God you were taught to fear might actually be far more loving and far less offended than religion told you. It suggests that the universe you were taught to see as empty might actually be crowded with life, layered with meaning, governed by intelligence. And it suggests quietly but relentlessly that you are not a mistake. In its view, you're not a sinner groveling for forgiveness or a random clump of atoms pretending your life matters. You are a soul in process, carrying within you a fragment of the very source that spun galaxies into being. That fragment is not above you, judging, is within you, guiding. Of course, all of this could still be wrong. It could be myth, fantasy, elaborate metaphor. The Urantia book itself acknowledges that your freedom to doubt is sacred. But it also insists on something most systems of belief are strangely afraid of: your right to investigate. That is where our journey in this story begins. Not with the demand that you convert, but with an invitation to explore a text that has been quietly sitting in the shadows since the 1950s, touching a small number of readers deeply while remaining almost invisible to mainstream religion and academia. How did it appear? Who or what is behind it? Why was it given now and not 1,000 years ago? And what kind of reality does it describe that would make so many established frameworks, from churches to universities, quietly turn away from it? To answer those questions, we have to leave the big blue book on the table for a moment and go back a century to a quiet room in Chicago where a man slept and a stranger's voice began to speak. That room, that voice, and the skeptical psychiatrist who walked into that mystery will become our entry point into one of the strangest origin stories in modern spiritual history. Because if you're going to even consider the possibility of a book written by higher intelligences, you deserve to know exactly how that claim began. Not as legend, but as testimony, dates, witnesses, and pages that arrived in the dead of night. This is where myth steps into psychology, where esotericism brushes up against clinical observation, and where a very ordinary human life became the doorway for an extraordinary narrative. If the universe really is trying to talk to us, the story of Urantia suggests it didn't choose a mountaintop or a burning bush this time. It chose a man who fell asleep. Once you hear that the Urantia book was dictated by higher intelligences, it sounds like pure legend. To take it seriously at all, you need to know where that claim comes from. Strangely, it doesn't begin with a prophet on a mountain. It starts with a medical file. In the 1920s, in Chicago, a family approached a psychiatrist named William Sadler. He was respected, well-trained, and very much a man of his time. Practical, skeptical, and tired of seances and table tapping. He had spent years debunking spiritualist tricks. So when they told him that a man in their family had begun talking in his sleep, he didn't expect a revelation. He expected a case study. The patient, never named in public, fell asleep normally. Then, without waking, he began to speak. At first that sounds ordinary. Lots of people mumble in their sleep. But Sadler noticed something different. The voice was steady. The sentences were complete. The content was not dream fragments. It was long, coherent monologues about God, the universe, mind, and destiny. The language was more precise than the man used when awake, and the ideas went far beyond his usual education. If you were in Sadler's position, you'd reach for familiar explanations, a kind of dissociation, a hidden talent, a subconscious that had absorbed more than anyone realized. That's exactly what he did. He approached the whole thing as a doctor, not as a believer. He listened, he observed, and he tried to fit what he saw into known patterns. The episodes continued over months, then years. The man did not develop other symptoms of psychosis. His day life stayed surprisingly normal. Yet at night, there was this other voice, organizing big ideas in a careful, step-by-step way. The content built on itself. Themes reappeared and connected, as if someone were teaching, not rambling. Eventually, Sadler invited a few trusted friends and colleagues to join him. They formed a small private circle that came to be called the Forum. They weren't followers, they were observers. They sat quietly in that Chicago living room while the sleeping man spoke, and they wrote down as much as they could. There were no candles, no robes, no incense. Just a group of adults with notebooks, trying to keep up with something they did not fully understand. Imagine the scene. A quiet evening. A man lies on a couch, breathing slowly. Without opening his eyes, he begins to describe levels of reality, different orders of spiritual beings, the long-term path of the soul. He defines terms. He refers back to concepts from previous nights. You look around. Nobody is performing. Nobody is asking you to believe anything. They're just collecting words. After a while, the Forum started doing something else. They asked questions. They wrote down what they wanted to know about science, religion, suffering, Jesus, life after death, and handed those questions in. According to their later accounts, those questions disappeared for a time and reappeared in the form of written papers, as if some unseen editorial process had taken place between sessions. Whatever happened behind the scenes, what the Forum received were finished documents. Each paper was organized, titled, and focused on a specific topic: the nature of God, the structure of the universe, the organization of spiritual beings, the history of our world, the meaning of Lucifer, the detailed life of Jesus. The documents did not read like rough transcripts. They read like chapters. The claimed authors of the papers were not the man in the bed. Inside the text, the writers identify themselves as different orders of celestial personalities, each assigned to reveal a certain area. Their tone is formal, sometimes dense, more like careful administrators than ecstatic prophets. They do not praise Sadler. They do not ask for worship. They do not demand that anyone start a new church. They simply present information and move on. You can look at that in two very different ways. From a psychological angle, it is easy to imagine a deep, creative, unconscious mind generating symbolic material and a circle of thoughtful listeners shaping that material into a system over the years. The human psyche is capable of inventing rich, ordered worlds. It often personifies its own depths, speaking in the voices of guides and higher beings. From a mythic and esoteric angle, the pattern is just as familiar. An entranced intermediary, a closed group of witnesses, messages that come in pieces, then cohere into a teaching. Many spiritual traditions begin exactly that way. What makes the Urantia story strange is how quiet it stayed. There were no public demonstrations, no advertised miracles, no attempt to build a movement around the phenomenon. The man at the center did not become a guru. He never toured, never claimed a title, never gave sermons. Outside those sessions, he lived an unremarkable life. Sadler, for his part, did not quit medicine to start a sect. The Forum met, read, talked, and then went back to their jobs and families. Over nearly 2 decades, those pages accumulated. The group slowly realized they weren't just dealing with isolated essays. The papers connected. Taken together, they formed a single enormous work. It began with God and the highest levels of reality, then stepped down through universes and administrations and spiritual orders until it finally arrived at our local universe, our galaxy, our world, Urantia, and then focused on one human life, Jesus of Nazareth. The final section, much longer than any one gospel, told his story from birth to death and beyond, filling in childhood, adolescence, travels, and private inner struggles. By the early 1950s, the question inside the Forum shifted from what is happening to this man to what do we do with this book? The answer came in 1955 when the Urantia book was printed for the first time. The cover named no author. It simply said the Urantia Book and listed the Urantia Foundation as publisher. The foundation had been created to protect the text and make it available, not to build a new religion around it. There was no marketing blitz, no big launch, no preacher thundering from a stage. The book appeared quietly, mostly found by people who were already searching. You could buy it. You could ignore it. No one knocked on your door, insisting you read it or be lost forever. For us, a century later, the exact mechanism may remain mysterious. Was this a subconscious genius? A strange form of dissociation? A genuine contact from something beyond the human field? A mix of all three? There may never be a final, tidy answer. But once you know the outline of the story, you can at least say this. The Urantia book did not drop out of the sky. It emerged slowly in the overlap between medicine, psychology, and spiritual hunger in a very human setting. And now it sits there between covers, waiting. From this point on, the book itself doesn't talk much about that Chicago bedroom. It doesn't ask you to keep staring at the man on the couch. Instead, it turns your attention outward and upward. It starts describing a universe that is not empty, not random, and not simple. A universe that looks less like a machine and more like a living, layered organism with intention running through it. To understand why some readers find that vision breathtaking and others find it dangerous, we have to follow where the papers lead next. Into the cosmology of Urantia, the way it says reality is actually built, and what that implies about who you are and why you're here. Once you step past the origin story, once you accept at least as a thought experiment that something unusual was happening in that Chicago living room, you run into the first real wall of the Urantia book, the scale of what it describes. Modern science already gives you a big universe. Galaxies, black holes, light years that stretch your imagination until you can't feel anything anymore. It is impressive, but in a strange way, it's also sterile. A lot of numbers, a lot of space, and not much heart. Religion, on the other hand, gives you a very personal God, but often in a small setting. One planet, one people, one book, one brief drama of sin and salvation. Urantia tries to stitch those two extremes together. It takes the cold scale of astronomy and the intimate language of mysticism and says, you're both half right and half blind. In its pages, the universe is not a dead machine running on autopilot. It is a living system, layered and organized. Think of it less like a factory and more like a vast school district with levels, teachers, administrators, and an overall curriculum aimed at one thing: the growth of consciousness. At the center of this living system is something called Havona. Urantia describes Havona as the perfect, eternal universe. Around Havona, like ripples around a stone dropped into water, are 7 enormous regions called the super-universes. We live in one of those 7. Its name, according to the text, is Urantia. Already, you can feel the language shift. You're no longer the citizen of a lonely planet in a random galaxy. You are an inhabitant of Urantia, one of 7 unimaginably large domains orbiting a perfect center. Each super-universe contains countless galaxies and worlds, each with its own story and spiritual status. The book doesn't stop at poetic description. It tells you there are governing personalities called the Ancients of Days, beings of staggering wisdom who preside over each super-universe. They are not pictured as old men on thrones, but as stable centers of decision, the way a Supreme Court or Council might be for a nation, except their jurisdiction stretches over billions of inhabited worlds. Within a super-universe, there are local universes, smaller, but still immense administrative units. Our local universe is called Nebadon, and this is where one of Urantia's most provocative claims comes in. The one who presides over Nebadon, its creator and ruler, is someone you already think you know. The book calls him Michael of Nebadon. On our world, you know him as Jesus. In Urantia's telling, Michael is a creator's son, a divine being, offspring of the universal Father and the eternal Son, entrusted with the creation and guidance of a local universe. His work is not only to call worlds into being, but to oversee the slow, patient development of the personalities who will live on those worlds. He is, in a sense, an architect and a gardener combined. This is not the usual picture of Jesus as a wandering teacher on a small planet. Here, his human life is the final act of a much longer story. Before he ever walked the hills of Galilee, he had already been at work on Nebadon for ages, setting up the structure in which billions of beings would grow. Whether you accept that or not, you can see what Urantia is trying to do. It is placing the figure of Jesus inside a much larger frame, one that stretches far beyond one religion or one planet. It's as if the book is saying, you have been staring at a single scene. Let us show you the whole play. The structure it describes is almost bureaucratic in its detail. There are orders of angels, administrators, messengers, trainers, overseers. There are worlds dedicated to specific phases of growth. There's a sense of progression, of responsibility passed down through ranks. It reads less like a fantasy novel and more like an attempt to describe a spiritual administration. What's striking is how this structure intersects with your inner life. If you've ever felt that experiences repeat until you learn a certain lesson, that your growth seems to follow stages rather than random jumps, Urantia's universe simply extends that pattern outward. It says, in effect, yes, there is a curriculum, and it does not end at death. It continues across levels of reality you can't yet see. In this model, our world, Urantia, is one of many evolutionary planets. Life here is rough, unfinished. We are in the early grades, not the final exam. The struggles we face, the confusion we live in, the clash between our higher ideals and our lower instincts are not signs that the system has failed. They are signs that we are at the beginning of the process. You can feel how different that is from the story that says you get one life, one chance, and then you're sorted forever into reward or punishment. The Urantia vision is more patient. It assumes that a finite, immature creature cannot reach perfection in a few decades on a difficult world. Instead, it offers a long arc. You start here, you learn what you can, and when this phase is over, you continue elsewhere on realms better suited to deeper growth. The cosmos, in this view, is not hostile. It is demanding, but it is set up in your favor. Every level is designed to stretch you just enough, to challenge your selfishness, expand your understanding, deepen your capacity for love, and refine your ability to cooperate with the divine presence within you. That inner presence is central. The whole structure only makes sense if something of God is actually in you, pulling you forward from the inside. The external hierarchies, the administrators, the teachers, they are supports, not replacements for that inner connection. Without that fragment of the source living in you, the universe would be a giant machine. With it, the universe becomes a training ground. Think about what that does to your sense of scale. Suddenly, your daily life is not separate from the rest of reality. Your private decisions, your small victories over fear or bitterness, your efforts to be honest when it would be easier to lie, those are not invisible to the larger structure. They're the raw material out of which your soul is formed. Here, Urantia quietly converges with ancient myth and modern psychology. Myth has always hinted that the world is a stage where gods and humans mix, where every choice has ripple effects beyond what we see. Psychology has shown us that our inner patterns, if unexamined, can rule our lives like unseen fate. Urantia takes both ideas and says, yes, and keep going. Your inner work is not only for this life. It is rehearsal for much larger roles. That doesn't mean everything is gentle and smooth. A structured universe is not a tame one. Free will does not disappear just because there's a curriculum. Beings at every level can choose alignment or distortion. The system has laws, but it is not rigid. It breathes. It allows risk. And this is where the story takes a darker, more dramatic turn. Because if the universe is so carefully arranged, if there are wise beings overseeing vast regions, if the goal is growth and not destruction, why does our world feel the way it does? Why so much cruelty, confusion, and spiritual amnesia? Why does Earth so often look and feel like a place that didn't get the memo? Urantia's answer is bold. It says we are not living in a normal textbook case. Our planet, and others like it, were swept into a much older conflict. A conflict not between God and humans, but between loyal and rebellious administrators within the universe itself. In other words, something went wrong upstream. The next movement in this narrative steps out of astronomy and into cosmic myth, into a story that echoes pieces of ancient scripture but reframes them completely. You've heard of Lucifer as a symbol, a fallen angel in religious language. Urantia treats him not as a cartoon villain, but as a real personality who used the very same freedom that makes growth possible to stage a revolt against the structure we've just walked through. And according to this book, that revolt left Earth in quarantine. Once you picture the universe as a carefully structured school, another question pushes in. If so much wisdom is supposedly in charge, why does life here feel so brutal, so confused, so off? This is where the Urantia book stops sounding like abstract cosmology and starts reading like myth on a cosmic scale. It does not say, God made a broken world, and it does not say humans are rotten at the core. Instead, it points the blame somewhere else, higher up the chain of command. Long before history, it says there was a high being named Lucifer, not the horn caricature, but a brilliant administrator, a system sovereign responsible for a cluster of inhabited worlds within Nebadon. He was trusted, gifted, admired. In other words, he had everything to lose. His revolt did not begin with fire and war. It began with a document. Lucifer composed what Urantia calls a manifesto, a long, carefully reasoned attack on the existing order. In it, he questioned the need for a universal father at the top of everything. He argued that the central universe should not have authority over local systems, and he insisted that personal autonomy ought to replace loyalty to any divine will. On the surface, it almost sounds noble: freedom, self-rule, no invisible parent hovering above. Urantia even acknowledges that Lucifer was intelligent. His ideas worked precisely because they blended real values, freedom, dignity, self-respect, with enough distortion to undermine the whole structure. Psychologically, it is the archetype of the ego breaking away from the deeper self, the part that says, I will be my own source. Mythically, it echoes Prometheus, the serpent in Eden, and the fallen angel, but stripped of flames and symbols and turned into something more modern, a disagreement about how reality should be governed. Lucifer was not alone. A secondary figure, Satan, served as his chief advocate. Local planetary leaders, planetary princes, in Urantia's language, had to choose sides. On our world, the planetary prince, named Caligastia, sided with Lucifer. In that one decision, Earth was pulled into a conflict it never started. There was no dramatic sky battle humans could see. What changed were loyalties in an invisible administration, the tone of the guidance filtering down, the spiritual weather around every world that joined the revolt. And with that shift, something else happened, something we still live inside. Those worlds were quarantined. Urantia describes circuits of spiritual communication running through the universe like nerves through a living body. Along those circuits flow coordination, wisdom, and direct contact with higher levels. When the rebellion spread, those circuits were cut for the affected systems. Not as an eternal curse, the book insists, but as containment, the way a city might seal off a neighborhood during a dangerous outbreak. Our planet, under a disloyal prince and a rebellious system sovereign, found itself suddenly isolated. From inside of human history, what does that look like? It looks like silence. Mystics across traditions keep returning to the same experience. God's hiddenness, the dark night of the soul, the sense that heaven is far away. Religions tell stories of a time when humans walked with the divine in a garden, then were driven out to toil in a harsh world. We inherit myths of a fall, an exile, a broken link between earth and heaven. Urantia reframes that. In its telling, the fall is not humanity being cursed for tasting forbidden fruit. It's the downstream effect of a leadership crisis in the invisible government over our planet. We didn't invent separation. We were born into it. On a psychological level, that lands in a way many people quietly recognize. There's a deep, almost wordless feeling some carry of having been abandoned by God, by life, by something that should have been there and wasn't. Therapists see it as early attachment trauma. Urantia suggests there is also a collective version, a species-level attachment wound. We grew up in a neighborhood cut off from the rest of the city. That doesn't mean we were left alone entirely. According to the book, some spiritual influences remained, and others were later sent in. But something vital was lost. Clear, unified, high-level guidance shared across the world. Our prophets and mystics caught flashes of light, but the circuitry that would have given us a coherent spiritual education was damaged. Seen through that lens, the patchwork of human religion looks different. Instead of one pure revelation and many false ones, you see scattered fragments of a larger picture. Different cultures formed partial images of the divine. Mystics in different traditions often touched similar truths, but their institutions rarely connected the dots. The signal was there, but faint and noisy. It would be easy to use that story as an alibi. It's not our fault. We were quarantined. Urantia does not actually let us do that. Yes, the environment was warped. Yes, we inherited a difficult setting. But the central theme of the book never changes. Free will is real. Within the quarantine, individual souls still choose. They can still listen, still grow, still love. If anything, the quarantine makes growth more intense. Learning to trust the divine presence in a world where the outer system is fractured is like learning to walk in the dark. You bump into more things. You bruise more often, but the strength you build is yours. Here, mythology and psychology merge in a way that feels close to home. The idea of a rebellious administrator named Lucifer may sound abstract, but the energy he embodies is not. It shows up in personal life as the reflex to distrust anything higher than the individual will, the urge to flatten reality so that only the self is sacred. It shows up in our systems as cultures built on self-assertion, control, and competition, economies that reward exploitation, institutions that resist any light that might expose their shadows. In Urantia's story, though, rebellion is not permanent. The book does not describe an endless stalemate between two equal forces. It describes a long, patient process of adjudication. Other parts of the universe, it says, have already dealt with similar revolts. The higher administration does not panic. It does not rush. It simply keeps working toward resolution. For Earth, that means quarantine is not our final status. The papers speak of circuits being slowly re-established, of a gradual reconnection with the wider spiritual family. They describe our planet not as a lost cause, but as a recovery case, a world in rehab. In that frame, the chaos we see around us, polarization, confusion, collapsing old structures, are not proof that everything is falling apart. They can be read as the birth contractions of a planet coming out of intensive care. You don't have to treat any of this as literal cosmic history to feel the psychological charge in it. As myth, it tells you, you're not crazy for sensing that the world has been off. The feeling that your species has been living below its potential is not just cynicism. It might be memory, distorted but real, and it carries a quiet hope. If separation had a cause, it can have an end. If the silence was the result of a quarantine, then reconnection is not a fantasy. It is part of the story. In that light, the arrival of a book like Urantia is not framed as a random curiosity. It appears as one thread in a larger repair project, a kind of transmission sent into an isolated zone to update its maps and prepare it for contact. You may decide that is too much to accept. You may file it under interesting mythology and move on. But even then, one implication is hard to escape. If outer systems can fail, if high-ranking beings can misuse their freedom, then the only truly secure line is the one that runs directly from the center of everything to the center of you. That is where Urantia turns next, not to more charts of angels and administrators, but to the most intimate part of its teaching, the thought adjuster, the fragment of God said to live within each human mind, quietly inviting cooperation even on the days when the rest of the universe seems to have forgotten your address. If the story ended with rebellion and quarantine, the Urantia Book would be little more than a cosmic tragedy. A beautiful structure, sabotaged from within, leaving us stranded in the dark. But it doesn't end there. After laying out universes and angels and administrators, after explaining rebellions and broken circuits, the book turns sharply inward and says, in effect, despite everything, the most important contact point was never cut. That contact point, in Urantia's language, is the thought adjuster. It sounds like a technical term from psychology, but the meaning is much more radical. According to the book, every normal-minded human being carries, at their core, a fragment of the divine, an actual piece of the universal Father. Not a symbol, not a metaphor, not a comforting idea, but a living presence embedded in the mind. From the outside, it shows up as something you already know, conscience, intuition, that quiet sense of this is right or this is not for me that arrives without shouting. From the inside, Urantia says that presence is working constantly, adjusting your thoughts toward truth, nudging your choices toward growth, gently steering your inner life toward alignment with the deepest reality. It doesn't control. It never forces. It simply refuses to give up. Think about the times in your life when you felt torn. One part of you wanted the easy path, the lie, the shortcut, the ego-stroking choice. Another part, often softer, said no. Not because of fear of punishment, but because something in you knew you would be smaller on the other side of that decision. If you listen carefully, you can feel the difference between those voices. One is anxious, grasping, defensive. The other is calm, persistent, strangely patient. Urantia would say, the first voice belongs to your unintegrated self, shaped by fear, habit, and culture. The second is the adjuster, the fragment of God within you, waiting for your consent. Modern psychology talks about the self, with a capital S, the deeper, organizing center of the personality that wants wholeness and truth. Mythology personifies that center as a guardian angel, a higher self, a daimon. Urantia leans in and names it more directly. It says the reason that inner center feels wiser than you is because it is wiser than you. It's not just a better part of your psyche. It is an actual presence that did not originate in your brain. If that is true, even as a symbolic framework, it changes the way you read your own life. For one thing, it means you were never truly abandoned. Even in a quarantined world, even in a society built on noise and distraction, there's a line no rebellion could sever. At the level that matters most, there has always been a quiet companionship sitting in the middle of your confusion. The book describes the adjuster as endlessly patient. It is not shocked by your worst moments. It doesn't flinch when you relapse into old patterns, or when you use your freedom to move away from what you know is right. It simply recalculates, like a spiritual navigation system that never runs out of battery. Its only goal is to bring you, step by step, choice by choice, into a state where you and are so aligned that you eventually fuse, no longer two, but one. That fusion is, in Urantia's vision, the real destiny of a human soul. Not a place, not a static heaven, a state in which a finite creature and an infinite fragment are permanently joined, and from that union, a new kind of being emerges, fully individual, yet fully aligned with the source. You don't become God, but you're never again separate from the piece of God that chose to live in you. Until then, life is a kind of apprenticeship. Every moral decision, every moment when you say yes to truth over self-protection, yes to compassion over cruelty, yes to courage over cowardice, is a tiny act of agreement with your adjuster. Those agreements shape the soul. In Urantia's language, the Urantia self, the emerging you that will survive death. The adjuster brings the pattern. Your choices supply the material. Of course, this is where shame usually tries to creep back in. If you grew up in a religious setting, you might hear all this and think, I've failed. I've ignored that voice for years. Why would it still want anything to do with me? But Urantia's tone here is almost shockingly gentle. It doesn't talk about you as broken beyond repair. It talks about you as unfinished. Incomplete is not an insult. It's a description of a process in motion. A child learning to walk is not a failed adult. They're a walker in training. The same is true for your soul. The adjuster's presence doesn't mean you will avoid pain. The book never promises that. It does suggest that pain, when met honestly, can become a teacher. Every time life strips away an illusion, a relationship that was built on lies, a self-image that collapses, a belief that no longer holds, you are offered a choice. You can close around the wound and harden, or you can bring that wound into the light of the inner presence and ask, what now? What is this here to show me about who I really am? In that question, the adjuster has room to work. You've likely had moments of sudden clarity, a realization in the middle of an argument that you are repeating your parents' patterns, a flash of insight that the job you thought defined you is actually strangling you, a moment of deep peace in meditation or prayer where, for a heartbeat, you feel absolutely held. Those are the cracks in the armor, and through those cracks, Urantia would say, the adjuster shines. You don't need special rituals to access it. Silence helps. Honesty helps more. Sitting still, turning off the noise, and simply watching your own mind, you begin to notice which thoughts carry that subtle weight of truth and which ones are just old scripts. Acting on the former, however awkwardly, however slowly, is how you move from mere belief into cooperation. From a book's perspective, spirituality is not primarily about joining the right group or reciting the right creed. It is about building a conscious relationship with the presence already living inside you. Religions can help or hinder that. Philosophies can clarify or confuse it. But the relationship itself is personal and direct. No one can live it for you. No one can permanently block it from you. In a world like ours, that message is quietly subversive. If you begin to trust your inner compass, you become less dependent on fear-based control. You start to question teachings that paint you as fundamentally unworthy. The idea that you are disgusting to God, that you must beg for worth, that you were born already condemned. Those narratives clash violently with the idea of a divine fragment willingly moving in with you. Why would infinite love choose to live inside something it hates? The more you sit with that question, the more the logic of shame starts to crack. You can see it in therapy rooms. People who carry an old conviction of being bad slowly realize that this belief was planted by wounded adults, institutions, or communities, not by the core of reality itself. Somewhere underneath that inherited story, they find a quieter knowing, I am not garbage. I am in process. Urantia simply extends that realization into a cosmic context. The thought adjuster is the antidote to both rebellion and dependency. It respects your freedom, even when you use it badly. It never overrides, never humiliates, never coerces. At the same time, it never agrees with your self-sabotage. It doesn't collude with your lies. It doesn't soothe you with flattering illusions. It loves you too much for that. This mixture, absolute respect, absolute honesty, is rare in human relationships. We're used to either control disguised as care or indulgence that avoids the hard truth. The adjuster offers something harder, a love that won't abandon you and won't lie to you. The more you orient to that inner relationship, the more the outer structures of your life begin to shift. You may find you no longer fit certain environments that thrive on manipulation. You may find you can't sit comfortably in systems that demand blind obedience. You may, for the first time, feel a solid no rise in your chest when confronted with something that violates your deepest sense of right, even if everyone around you calls it normal. From Urantia's point of view, that is exactly what a recovering world needs. Individuals who are inwardly anchored enough to serve as quiet points of sanity in a culture still shaped by an old rebellion. And that brings us to a tension the book never ignores. If every person on this planet carries such a fragment, if each one is capable of direct inner guidance, then any power structure built on the idea that you need an external mediator to reach God is sitting on a fault line. Because once people discover that the divine lives in them, the old ways of controlling them start to erode. This is where the teaching of the thought adjuster slides naturally into the next question. If Urantia presents such a dignifying, decentralizing vision of spirituality, one that removes the need for priestly monopolies and rigid dogmas, why hasn't it become more widely known? Why has this book stayed mostly at the edges, quietly moving individuals but rarely being acknowledged by institutions? To answer that, we have to look not at angels or rebels, but at very human systems. Churches, academies, and organizations whose survival often depends, consciously or not, on you not fully trusting that inner voice. Once you accept the idea of an inner divine presence, once you let the thought adjuster stand in the middle of the room, something quietly radical starts to happen. You become more difficult to manage. You're still human, still scared sometimes, still capable of self-deception. But a person who knows, even vaguely, that God lives in them is different from a person who believes God can only be reached through the right building, the right robe, the right ritual. Sooner or later, that inner knowing begins to ask uncomfortable questions of the systems around it. And that is exactly where the Urantia book starts to become dangerous. Not dangerous because it teaches violence or hatred. Dangerous because it removes the need for a spiritual middleman. Look at religion first. For centuries, religious institutions have done two things at once: preserved genuine flashes of truth and wrapped those flashes in layers of fear, control, and cultural baggage. Priests, imams, pastors, monks, they've often held real wisdom, real compassion. They've also held power. Over time, systems form around that power. Hierarchies, dogmas, rules that say who is in and who is out. Into that landscape, Urantia walks in with an awkward, unmarketable message. God is not playing favorites with nations or denominations. The divine is not confined to one scripture. Jesus does not belong to a single religion. And the most important temple is your own inner life. It doesn't flatter the idea of a chosen group with exclusive access. It doesn't threaten hell for failing to sign up. It doesn't teach that salvation depends on belonging to the right brand. In fact, it says the real work of the soul is happening far beyond any institution's walls, across multiple stages of existence, guided primarily by the fragment of God within you and the long arc of your decisions. If you run a system that depends on people believing you are the gatekeeper to God, what do you do with a book like that? You can denounce it as heresy, but that draws attention to it. You can endorse it, but that undermines your own special status. The easiest thing is the quietest. Ignore it. Don't mention it in seminaries. Don't write about it in official commentaries. Let it sit on the fringe, filed next to weird cult literature, even though it doesn't actually ask anyone to join a cult. So the Urantia book ends up in a strange position. It's too structured and theologically rich to be dismissed as simple New Age fluff, but too disruptive to fit comfortably into traditional religion. It doesn't offer a new hierarchy. It questions the need for so many of the old ones. It doesn't ask for your tithe. It asks for your attention. On the other side of the cultural map, academia has its own issues with a book like this. Modern scholarship is built on a particular lens, materialism. If something can't be measured, tested, or at least traced through human historical development, it's treated with suspicion. A text that claims to be authored by celestial beings? That's a non-starter. It gets labeled pseudoscience, revealed religion, or channeled text, and shuffled out of serious discourse. Yet if you actually open the book, it doesn't sound like the typical channel material academics are used to ignoring. There's no vague talk of vibrations and manifesting. Instead, there are detailed cosmologies, psychological insights, and a sophisticated reframing of Jesus' life that could easily be analyzed next to the church fathers or modern theologians. To treat it seriously, though, a scholar would have to walk a tightrope. They need to say, I'm not endorsing its supernatural claims, but I am acknowledging that this text is intellectually complex and spiritually influential. That alone can feel risky in a world where your career often depends on not wandering too far from accepted frameworks. It's safer to write another paper on a canonized gospel than to be the professor who studies Urantia. So, again, the simplest move is silence. There doesn't have to be a smoky backroom where bishops and deans conspire to suppress the book. It's more ordinary than that. Institutions develop immune systems. Anything that doesn't fit their categories, anything that might force them to rethink first principles, gets quietly walled off. Add to that the way our attention economy works. We live in a culture trained by short clips, headlines, and outrage. The Urantia Book is 2,000 pages long. It has no charismatic spokesperson, no miracle-working founder, no scandalous backstory to feed the algorithm. It doesn't lend itself to easy memes. You can't skim it in a weekend and feel like you've got it. In a world where spiritual ideas go viral by being simple, flattering, or shocking, Urantia is none of those things. It is patient. It is dense. It speaks in long arcs. It assumes you're willing to wrestle. That alone guarantees it will never explode in popularity. And yet, for the few who do stumble on it, often by accident, often at a moment when their old frameworks are crumbling, it can feel like someone turned on a light in a room they didn't know they were in. Here is where the book's real danger shows. It doesn't just offer new information. It changes your relationship to information itself. Instead of telling you, here is the final answer, stop asking questions. It invites you into a mode of living where questioning becomes part of your spirituality, where doubt is not a sin but a tool, where faith is not blind assent, but a trust born of direct inner experience. For systems built on compliance, that kind of person is hard to manage. A human being who listens to their thought adjuster will sometimes agree with their priest, their teacher, or their government. Sometimes they won't. Their loyalty is no longer primarily to a symbol or a flag or a brand. It is to truth as best they can hear it. That doesn't make them perfect. It makes them responsible. Responsibility is heavy. Many people don't want it. It's easier to outsource spiritual life to an expert. Let the preacher tell me what God thinks. Let the influencer tell me what's true. Let the university tell me what's real. In exchange, I'll give up my right to wrestle with the deep questions myself. So even on a personal level, a book like Urantia can feel threatening. If any of what it says is even partially true, then your life is not small. Your choices matter in ways you didn't suspect. Your inner state is not just a private mood. It is the workshop where your eternal self is being built. That realization is exhilarating and terrifying at the same time. It's easier, sometimes, to laugh it off, to say, it's just another big weird book, to go back to scrolling, to familiar doctrines, to the comforts and anxieties you already know. That's understandable. Tearing down a worldview without something healthier to replace, it can be dangerous. Urantia itself repeatedly warns against fanaticism. It doesn't want you to throw away your critical mind. In fact, its challenge to you is almost painfully simple. Read with an open mind and a sharp eye. Compare what it says about God, Jesus, the universe, and the soul with what you already know from experience, from psychology, from your own moments of clarity. Keep what resonates, question what doesn't, and refuse to give your power away to any text, including this one. Whether you end up accepting Urantia as revelation, viewing it as a brilliant symbolic myth, or rejecting it entirely, the deeper invitation is the same. Become the kind of person who is not afraid to re-examine inherited stories. In that sense, the Urantia book becomes less important than what it awakens in you. Because after all the cosmology, after all the talk of Havona and superuniverses and creator suns and Lucifer and mansion worlds, you still wake up tomorrow on the same planet, in the same body, with the same unfinished relationships and the same inner voice that has been whispering to you since childhood. The question is not just, is this book true? The question is, now that you've heard its story, what will you do with the questions it stirred up in you? You can put the book back on the shelf and never open it. You can dive in and read every page. You can let it sit in the back of your mind as one more possible map of a reality that refuses to be simple. In all three cases, your thought adjuster is still there, waiting, ready to take whatever you give it, your curiosity, your skepticism, your longing, and turn it into another step forward. Whether Urantia is a divine transmission or a human attempt to describe the indescribable, its power lies in the way it points you back to that inner line, back to the quiet place where myth and psychology and spirit all overlap, where you're no longer just a believer or a skeptic, but a soul in process, standing at the edge of a very large, very mysterious, and possibly very loving universe. The camera could fade here, but the conversation doesn't really end. It simply moves from this video into the rest of your life. Maybe you close your eyes for a moment after this. You feel the weight of your own routine, work, relationships, bills, notifications, and you notice how small those things can feel when held up against talk of superuniverses and eternal journeys. Yet that is exactly where all of this matters most. Because if the universe is a school, then today is one class. The people you meet, the conflicts you face, the choices you make when no one is watching, those are not side notes. They are the curriculum. You don't have to see angels or read a 1,000-page book to participate. You participate every time you choose honesty over convenience, compassion over contempt, curiosity over numbness. You may never read the Urantia book. You may download it tonight and devour it. Either way, the deeper work is the same. Learning to trust, even a little more, that quiet, patient presence inside you. To give yourself enough silence that you can hear it. To question any voice, internal or external, that tries to convince you you're worthless, disposable, or alone. If there is one thread that runs through everything we've explored, it's this: you are not an accident, and you are not finished. You're not meant to hand your mind to systems that thrive on fear. You're meant to grow, to question, to remember. Maybe Urantia is a blueprint your soul has been waiting for. Maybe it's one more myth pointing toward a truth too big for any single story. The only way to know is to keep walking, to keep asking better questions, and to let experience, not just authority, shape your answers. When you step away from the screen, life will rush back in. Messages, noise, obligations. But somewhere underneath that small, steady signal is still there, the same one that brought you to a video like this in the first place. You don't need anyone's permission to follow it.